it's my pleasure to introduce one of our main speakers, Hannah Fox. Hannah Fox from the University of East London. She will be online. I hope she is over there. And I want to tell you the story about our relationship between University of East London and Pascal University. 3 years ago, Universidad Blas Pascal and UEL signed a cooperation agreement that marked the beginning of a meaningful academic partnership. Since then, we have been building bridges between our institutions through collaborative projects and a shared commitment for teacher education. Today's talk is another step forward in this journey. Hannah Fox is a senior lecturer at UEL and the course leader for the Masters in Leadership in Education. She brings with her extensive experience as an educator, researcher, and leader in both higher education and secondary schools. Her current doctoral research focuses on teacher agency and empowerment, a topic that resonates deeply with the goals as educators and institutions. Please join me in welcoming Hannah Fox. Hello, Hannah.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Great. It's great to be here. I don't know if you can see me. I can see everyone from the side. So hi. Hi, everyone. It's really lovely to be here today. And thank you so much for welcoming me. It's a real honor to be here and to be able to talk to you today about this topic. It's something that's really close to my heart. Would it be okay, should I start sharing some slides, just as some sort of visual aids? Is that okay?
Oh, we don't see your screen.
Okay, I was just about to start to. So if that's okay, that would be good.
Okay, now you're sharing your screen. Yeah.
Great, perfect. Hang on. Okay, is that big enough? Everyone can see this?
Excellent.
Perfect. Okay. Hi everyone. Yeah, I've been wonderfully introduced already, and thank you so much. I can't see you, but I think I'm speaking with Letitia, who we spoke the other day on the phone, and we've got this ongoing conversation and relationship. And I just wanted to put on the screen really right from the start my contact details, because I would love for anyone that's listening today, if you've got any kind of questions, or if you've got your own research you'd like to share, or have any kind of collaboration, I would really welcome it. And I'd love to hear from you. So please feel free to make note of my LinkedIn and of my email address as well, because I'd love these conversations to carry on after the conference. A quick note as well, I realise I'm not in the room today, so I have got a couple of points in this PowerPoint where I'm going to attempt to do something a little interactive, which will just involve you using your mobile phone to scan a QR code. If you are able to do that, that would be great. If you're not able to, do not worry. I was just trying to make it a bit interactive and apparently make this more stressful for myself than it needs to be as well, because dealing with tech over the ocean is not the easiest. So my talk today, it really centres around creativity, but it centres actually at the beginning, certainly for the first part of this kind of presentation and talk, around the kind of constraints that we might find ourselves under that might lead us to believe or feel that we aren't able to be creative in our classrooms. And that's certainly something that I felt when I was teaching in secondary schools and still do now, even in higher education. So I wanted to start very briefly with a bit about me, because we don't know each other. Unfortunately, I'm not in Argentina. I would love to be, but I'm sat here in dreary England at the moment. So I just wanted to form a bit of a connection here. I spent 10 years as a secondary school English teacher in the UK teaching, and that's aged sort of 11 to 18 over here. And that also included some departmental leadership and curriculum design as well. The reason I mention that is because I have had conversations with Letitia about this as well, and with Mario, who's one of your contacts and works at the University of East London, around the fact that actually, even though our schools might be in very different locations, that actually I think we might be working under quite a similar background. And I'm taking a bit of a leap there, but I'll explain myself in just a moment around what I mean by that. I'm really passionate about education, as we all are. I'm particularly passionate about teachers being able to teach professionally, being able to have their own professional choices, what I term agency. And my research, as was already said, is in this idea of how much space, how much agentic space might we be able to gain even under constraint. And that's when creativity comes in as a potential antidote, resistance perhaps, but I'm actually posing today as it being a vital part of who we are as teachers, and it being really at the core of who we are. It's kind of a bit of activism, I suppose, on my part, and a bit of being here today is a bit about empowerment and activism, and I think that's also why I would really love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on this, but also your thoughts and your experiences working in your institutions as well, and to connect after all of this is over. So I'm starting off by posing some questions, and I realize I'm not in the room today to just take some answers. So in a moment, this is when this QR moment is going to occur. And I just want you to be thinking about the purpose of education. Now, that might seem a little odd. Why am I starting with the purpose of education when actually we're talking about creativity, we're talking about potential constraints? But actually, within my research, I've started to track back because I started to think, if my own positionality, if my own experience has been that I have felt constrained by the choices perhaps of my government, my department for education, the schools that I've worked in that might want to overly standardize perhaps, suggest curricula that I don't necessarily feel is right for my students or right for my subject, where is all of that coming from? I don't believe there's some evil overlord somewhere who wants to constrain education. Where is it all coming from? And so this is what I was thinking, okay, so what is the purpose of education? Is my view on how it should be the right one? I don't know if there is the right one. And what does this all really mean? So I think this is really where I wanted to start. And I wanted to ask you, when you look at your students, I know that I've got a range of people in the audience today, that some of you are working with other teachers, some of you are working at university, some of you work with children as your students, but whatever age, whatever path in life your students are, what do you want from them, for them? What do you think the purpose of them coming to you for an education is? And it might just be a couple of words that pop into your head, and I certainly know a few of them that come to my mind. I want to talk about why we were considering this before I pose that question to you properly. And one of the reasons I want us to consider this is what I've just said, really, around these choices that might be made and we might feel are being made outside of our control, that we might be given a test to teach to. And we think, why these questions? Why are they trying to get my students to understand this? This isn't what's relevant. So actually, I'm trying to give us a lens through which we might be seeing these choices and why these educational reform choices are being made. What are others seeing education as being for? What is the lens that the government might be seeing it through, the Department for Education, the school, the university? What might they be thinking? But it also comes with a warning, really. And the warning is that education is a very complex system and dynamic, and it can't possibly have a fixed purpose. So even though we are discussing this, it is an ongoing debate, and it is not one that I have the answer to. I might have my own views, as you would have your own, but really those are our educational values, and they are the things that underpin all of the pedagogic decisions that we make day to day in the classroom, holding those values really close to our hearts all the time and making our educational choices based off of those, I think really can give us that intrinsic motivation and can mean really that we can't feel perhaps the regret that we might feel about doing something differently, and maybe we start to really build a purpose in our classrooms that we really kind of back. And that's why it's important, I think, to work for an institution whose values mirror your own. The University of East London is really passionate, for example, about providing education to those who may not have had a positive experience of education in the past. We serve a really diverse community in London, and we continue to expand our reach. And I think that is something that really, really sits close to my heart and why I feel very comfortable working there. So it's something to kind of, I suppose, ask yourself as well. This idea that it's it's not a binary. It's certainly not a binary. It's not one thing nor another. And we're acknowledging that. We're acknowledging that the purpose is as changeable as the society and the complex society that education sits in. And then we also might ask ourselves, is it a futile question? Because it's always changing, it's always evolving. What education might be, what society wants, what we want, what our students want is ever changing. And actually, again, that's where creativity comes in once more, because to be creative is to innovate, to be able to come up with something new. And when we're working in a society that is changing more quickly than we can possibly keep our hands on, actually this idea of being able to be creative and our students being able to be creative, I think is of really, really vital importance. So I come back to these questions for you to have a think about, and I'm hoping that the tech works on the next slide. If it doesn't, I guess it doesn't, and maybe I'll be able to hear from you at the end using the microphone. So what do you want for your students? Think about questions like, what do you hope education might be helping them with? How do you want them to emerge in the outside world? Why do we even engage with this formalized education system that we have? So this is the QR code. I'm hoping that it will work on your end. I did practice with it the other day. And it would be fantastic if you could scan it, or if you could type in menti.com if that doesn't work, and type in the code that's on the screen. And you'll just get a little box that will pop up that will allow you to just free type into that box. And those answers will be anonymous, but they'll be popping up on my side, and I should be able to see what it is that you're saying. So I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes and just hope that perhaps this works, and that we see a few answers coming through. And once they start coming through, I should be able to display them on the screen as well.
Does it work?
I'm hoping it does. I can also try something here.
In here, Hannah, they are all scanning the QR code, so you will be getting some answers.
Perfect. I'm just going to try and see if I can present it on the screen as well. So give me one moment for that. Great. So we are seeing some answers coming up. I've got one on the screen anyway, but I can see 50 people have joined. So that's fantastic. I'll give you a few more minutes. I'd just love to see as many of these ideas popping up as possible.
Wow, there are some longer
scroll through
answers.
There are. It's fantastic. The QR code's still at the bottom if people need to scan, but I'm going to remove it in a moment so we can see more of those answers as well.
I don't think
53 people have joined.
I don't think the audience can read properly the answers.
These are really small, are they? Okay, that's fine. There's just, I suppose that's just for me then, and I can read out a few as we go. So the things that I'm seeing come through here, this is really, really interesting. You may not be able to see them your end. It might be too small, but we're getting a lot of answers that are really about open thinking, innovation, growth, and being able to grow. The idea of education as freedom, that's an amazing one. Education serves as the medium to free people and break barriers. I mean, whoever wrote that might as well be doing this talk, because that is very much the kind of focus of that today, this emancipatory nature of education. I believe it holds, and I believe that creativity is one of the routes to getting there. And I'll talk about what that might look like in a later part of this presentation today. Helping them to achieve their fullest potential, absolutely. To adapt to the future, again, another one that we need creativity for. So we're getting so many come in, and please continue to post them, because if I can't read them now, I can read them after the session today, and I'll be able to respond as well. I can scroll down here. I'll be able to respond as well. I'll be doing this for questions at the end. So if there's any questions I don't get to at the end, I'll make sure that I email my responses to the university, and they'll be sent out. Break boundaries, have an independent mind. This is lovely, to enlighten our students' souls. I think that's wonderful. Again, whoever wrote that, that's a really interesting one here. To free people, power, growth. So many of these words are linking together so closely. Confidence, capability, free and better citizens for our students. That's what we want. And that's really, really interesting, because actually, certainly from my perspective, and I can't speak for Argentina, of course, but certainly from my perspective, I think so often when we are teaching day to day in a classroom, whether that's in higher education or whether that's in a school classroom, we might feel quite constrained. We might feel that actually the aim of education, however we see it, is perhaps quite economic, maybe, is so students can gain qualifications, can gain grades. And of course, we want our students to be able to leave us with something that allows them to open doors for their futures. And qualifications is one way that they can do that. But of course, that isn't everything. And I think that's what these answers are revealing right now, that actually every single one of you that has posted on here are acknowledging that deeper meaning for education, that deeper purpose that we're clearly all so incredibly passionate about. So thank you so much for engaging with that. I promise I won't keep doing it. I've got a couple more today, but not too many. I will be talking myself as well. Let me just move this because this looks like it isn't full screen. That's better. Okay, so there are some possible areas in the research that talks to us about this. And those of you that have conducted your own educational research, perhaps the doctors in education yourself, this might be something that's more of a recap for you than anything else. But I think it's just really important to acknowledge, and certainly for me, to acknowledge some of the things some of the lenses that we might see education through. One of those possible lenses could be termed instrumentalism or non-instrumentalism. Instrumentalism being this idea that education and the purpose of education is for anything that is of benefit to our economy. And actually, we see quite a lot in literature this idea that perhaps education owes something to the economy, particularly state education. It's often called, having a tax-paying parent, is what some of the literature says. It's funded by the society and the economy around us, therefore shouldn't it be suited to fit it and to continue its growth? And there are some really, really strong arguments in that. Of course, we also want our students to be able to, have jobs, contribute to society. And it makes sense, therefore, that we might be training them in things, we might be using education in a way that would help to benefit them in that area. Then there's this other view of this idea of actually non-instrumentalism, which is, again, it seems very binary, and I'm going to question that in a moment, that this idea that actually education can be a value in and of itself, that it's of value because it's education. It's of value because it's one of the few spaces in a formalized education environment where we really give ourselves time to perhaps be little philosophers sometimes, to think things through, to deepen our understanding and knowledge. And that might contribute back to our larger society and economy, but in that moment, it's of value in and of itself. And I really like literature as well that talks about, especially if we're working with young people, that talks about people as not, those young people as not being only valuable because they are going to eventually contribute, or the adults that we work with at university, they're gaining this so they can contribute to society, but that in that moment, they are called the becomings. They are already, their experience as they are in the learning process is of value in and of itself. And it isn't about that end goal, it is about the journey of getting there, and that in itself has intrinsic value. So this idea really at the moment sounds quite binary, but actually we talked earlier about how education has this multifaceted purpose, that it can never be so binary, that we're dealing with a very, very complex beast here, as it were. So actually, is it okay to view it as this binary? And I would argue possibly not, that actually it's such a complex system that it must be seen with appropriate complexity. And in some of the leadership literature that we look at on the program that I lead, it's often termed a wicked problem or a wicked solution, this idea that actually it's such a complex thing in and of itself that we must deal with it with the appropriate complexity. And the only way of dealing with it is to come at it from a multifaceted angle, that it can be more than one thing. And actually much of the literature I've been reading at the moment talks about how we don't have to be angry or fearful of the idea that education might be serving an economic goal. It isn't always restrictive or constraining, that actually as long as education sits with the values of the common good, it can absolutely suit economic purposes as well. But that actually the really core thing that we need to remember is that those educational decisions need to sit in the public domain. And the fear is, certainly in the UK, and I think perhaps this is happening in Argentina as well, is that with more of the kind of private sector values coming in and the more privatization we do see, the less that those values are sitting in the public domain and the more they are serving small corporate values, private values, and those might be where we're feeling that kind of constraint within our classrooms, whether we are in higher education or whether we are in schools. a really interesting study, and I wanted to highlight it to you. It's not particularly new, but I found it really interesting that actually, obviously, we are seeing marketisation in places outside of England, of course, and we've got America, Australia, lots of other countries that see this as well. And from my brief conversations, I believe Argentina too. But that actually marketisation, much like with this idea of the private sector values, it doesn't in and of itself have to be this negative thing. Again, so long as the values that underpin it are those of the public domain. And actually in Sweden, we see a high level of marketisation, but what we do not see is this kind of oppressive fear culture that we certainly have in England, where we're sort of overly standardised, overly, held accountable. We've got all of these kind of performance tables and Ofsted and, exams are happening all the time. Because actually what happens in Sweden is, although they have some accountability, everything is underpinned by values of social inclusion and equality. And actually the welfare system there is really, really strong. So even though we have that marketisation, it's holding some teachers to account. But the reports are the teachers actually feel it's challenging them in a very positive way. So again, there is such complexity here that I'm certainly not arguing that one thing is better than another, or that one thing is wrong and one thing is right. I actually think it's about understanding that complexity. And the reason that I've started the talk today and given so much time to this background of education is because we must understand the constraints and the challenges that we sit in. If we are going to realistically make any changes to our classrooms or pedagogy, we've got to be thinking, obviously, about the kind of sector and the limitations that we are sitting in and trying to work within that. So after thinking about what is the purpose of education, I was thinking about what is the purpose of us as teachers. And I think what's really interesting here is that teachers can have obviously multiple purposes, but some of the things that you were highlighting in some of your moments there on Mentimeter was this idea that we want our students to grow and we want them to be able to engage in society. And actually that's really important. If we just see education as having this economic aim, we might be doing something that is just kind of seeing the knowledge that we want to give over as being useful knowledge. And I've given an image here of children back in the Victorian industrialized era working on various new technologies and machines. Teaching that sort of tacit knowledge, teaching facts, it can be useful, of course. I'm not binary one or the other. But if we're teaching for an exam or we're teaching for the economy, we are teaching these kinds of things. We're teaching people perhaps how to use new machinery as it was in the Victorian era, and it might be something now that might then become outdated, and also it's quite limiting. So instead, and this is where the creativity comes in, we might want to see teachers' purpose as being those that deliver what we might consider to be really useful knowledge. And we term really useful knowledge as being powerful, conceptual knowledge that underpins the facts and the things that we might be going through for some examinations. Things like the nature of power, the nature of politics, political understanding of the environment and of the world around us. Actually being able to engage with that, perhaps on sometimes quite a conceptual or philosophical level, as being something that's really, really important and something that teachers are there for. And Bista, one of my favorite writers, and I'm hoping that many of you may be nodding along to Bista. If you haven't read his work, I strongly recommend that you do. His book, The Beautiful Risk of Education, has got to be one of my favorite educational texts that there is. He talks about how teachers' purpose is redirecting attention. So actually this idea that teachers only have a purpose for things that can't be done without them comes from him. This idea that actually students might be able to learn some of these things from books, from computers, from living that world out around them. But what teachers can do is have our students in the room and direct attention here and there. And when a student questions something, drawing them back. So I know who I'm speaking to here, your English language teachers. This is not my specialism. I was an English literature and language teacher, but to native English speakers. So thinking about it in your context, when a student might struggle to understand some knowledge about something, actually thinking about, let's engage with that. Let's engage with, why do we need to understand this? What does this underpin underneath it all? And really trying to engage with it to give it purpose. And our role is the role of creatively doing that, being able to see underneath that kind of factual base knowledge to the conceptual underneath and how we can really engage our students in that way. Because actually the root of all of this being, what is it that we might be using education for? Well, there's a number of different things that we can see education as being for, but Bita talks about this notion of subjectification, which I think is the root of why creativity is so important to education. The idea that qualification is absolutely one thing. Our students need qualifications out in the world. I'm not arguing against that. But subjectification is this idea of being able to see ourselves as a subject in the world and knowing where we sit in the world, why we might be here, what the systems are around us and at play. And quite rightly, for those of you that pointed out this idea of education, of having this emancipatory freedom power, that is where that comes from. Enabling our students to think critically, and I think the root to that, and that is what creative thinking is, I believe to be a central responsibility of teachers, rather than being perhaps an add-on that we might sometimes see, or something that we don't have time for, or something that the constraints around us make it seem impossible to do. And my last part on Bista, I promise. I love this notion here and this image actually that I found as well of sanctuary. I've searched for sanctuary and quite a few came up, but I think this one's quite ethereal. This idea of a school as being a sanctuary. So the Greek word for school, scholar, free time, it meant free time. And it doesn't mean free time in the sense of leisure or pleasure time necessarily. Some of our students probably would be thinking, definitely not, school or university doesn't necessarily equate to pleasure all the time. But it's this idea of it being protected time, of it being time that's protected for our opinions and ideas and thinking, that we can really have this, it's quite a beautiful and should be a very protected space where we can have the freedom to engage with multiple concepts, to question, to work out where we're sitting in those concepts and how we feel about them and who we are. And those things actually forming the basis, I believe, of the purpose of education, and one of the most important parts of it, which is, again, this idea of how this links into creativity, because this is creativity, thinking critically, questioning, engaging with those larger concepts is creative thinking, is critical thinking. It is all one. And I think that's a really interesting thing for me to think about going into my research anyway. And I've sort of talked about this part already, but I thought perhaps a diagram of these kind of various points of what education might be for could potentially be useful, but I don't think I'm going to need to give it much more time right now. So I talked about how there might be a little bit of a conflict though. So this idea actually that although we want this sanctuary, I'm going to bring that image up again, this sanctuary space, this beautiful image doesn't look anything like, for me, Ofsted looks, or your equivalent perhaps of investigators and quality assurers that come in and tell you what to do, perhaps of the examination pressures that you might feel. I know that there's some curriculum restraints that some of you may have as well. This image doesn't really equate to that. So it might sometimes feel that these things are in conflict with one another. And I can understand that feeling, because actually that's something that led me to come into higher education, into universities, because I wanted to explore this and I wanted to challenge it. And my research aims to challenge it, aims to see that even though we might feel that we are in this confined space, we could actually see it more as a funnel for ideas, which is what this image is here. That yes, we do have natural barriers around us, perhaps, things that might feel like a conflict, but that can be sometimes a real pressure cooker for creativity, giving ourselves those boundaries that we work within. So although this marketization, which I'm kind of terming as this competition, scrutiny, league tables, might lead to these performative standards, so standardizations of lessons, perhaps feeling of fear, and certainly Stephen Ball would agree with this idea of fear, talking about the teacher's soul in one of his very famous pieces, this idea that when we're all under scrutiny, we might feel guilt that we're not doing things in the right way. It fosters this test culture, and that can actually disconnect us from who we are as teachers, from our values. It can alienate us as well. And actually, I think we can draw that back. I'm hoping no one feels that alienation right now, but maybe this is familiar to you. This idea of a performative culture as being one where we might feel we have to set our personal beliefs to one side, where we actually think, well, I have to lead here in an outcomes-based judgment. I'm being told to do data in this way, or teach in this way, or teach from this curriculum. and I don't have a choice. So if that's the case, I have to set aside my own personal values, my own personal teaching beliefs, and I have to live this kind of life. And I know in England, for a lot of teachers, that is something that's driving people out of education, which is why this is such an important thing and why it's so central to something that I'm passionate about. This idea that our values-led judgments, our creativity, our risk, our innovation feels at odds with these things. It feels irreconcilable. And I know that that can feel quite depressing. And I sort of want to pull it out of this depressing moment, actually, because I don't want to go into this anymore. I think it's something that hopefully you can recognize, you might feel, you might know, you might be familiar with. I'm also interested if anyone is already thinking, but I've got a creative way around this, because actually that is the focus of my research, is going into schools and asking teachers, so basically, what do you do? How do you stay creative? And trying to share that knowledge. And anyone that wants to connect with me on that, I'd be really happy to hear from you. So please do. So to finish up that section then, what education is for, the idea that actually we're trying to prepare students not for the world as it is, but to enable them to engage with the world as it could be. And actually, if they're the ones that are going to be creating the world, whether they're young, whether they're in university already, if they're the ones that are learning in order to put something out there into society, then they're the ones that have to be innovative, because the world is changing so rapidly. They say something, I think it's something ridiculous, like 25% or maybe up to a third or maybe even a half of jobs that young people might get now don't even exist yet, because technology is so rapidly changing. So therefore, we must absolutely, we've got a responsibility to arm our students, whether they are young or whether they are not young, but if they're going out there into that workforce, into the world, it's not just about arming them with a qualification, it's arming them with some creative thoughts, some critical thoughts, to know who they are, to get that freedom, absolutely, and to be able to be flexible to this highly changing world that we're facing, that we've got around us. So my second QR code, I'm hoping it works again, is what does creativity in education mean to you? Because I'm going to give you some thoughts on this about what it means to me. I've already said a few things, but mostly at the moment I've been talking about some of those constraints, and now we're flowing into the creativity section of this talk. And I'm really interested in what creativity in education means to you. Take your time. I'm going to leave this on the screen. I know it. I think it works now. I might need to go back to the Menti and just simply switch the slide over. So give me a moment here. There we go. It should now hopefully have switched to this new title, and it might be something that you are able to see. It's the same QR code as before. It's the same thing as before, but I'll just bring this back up again for a moment in case people have X'd out of it, but it should be exactly the same as before. I don't know if it's, it is working, amazing. Okay, good. I'm just going to go back to the QR code again just for a moment then, so that people can see it in case anyone has X'd out. I can see some answers coming through, so that's great. I'm so happy it's worked.
It is working, yeah.
That's great. Lovely, thank you. So I know that you can't really see these very well, so I'm going to be going through and reading a few of them out in just a moment. I'm just going to give a little bit longer for people to formulate their responses. Again, we've got freedom coming up a lot. This is what I mean, this kind of connection between our purpose as teachers, the purpose of education, our educational values, and the absolute innate part of that being creativity. What I'm not seeing, which is interesting, I'm not seeing a lot of language of it's art, it's poetry, because I think quite often the word creativity, certainly when it's touted by an English teacher, an ex-English, well, I still see myself as an English literature teacher, but an English teacher, it's often, you get to do creativity because you're an English literature teacher. Well, I teach now in a university on a master's in leadership in education, which sounds like one of the least creative subjects, I imagine, compared to literature. And I'd like to think I'm just as creative as I was, because the root of what creativity is absolutely not the property of art or of an artistic subject. And that is definitely something that's close to my heart that I'll be speaking about in a moment. So I'm just going to go through a couple of these and then get back to the main thing. So I would like to have some time at the end if there's any questions as well, and I'm conscious of that time. So freedom in how to learn, innovation has come up a number of times. Thinking of possibilities, going outside the box has come up a number of times as well, and imagination. Let your soul go away. I love this soul coming back again. I wonder if that's the same person here. Making a difference, possibilities of thinking, inspiring, open-mindedness, freedom again. We've got so much of that freedom coming through. Please do continue to post your responses, because I'll be looking back over these at the end with great, great interest. So here's my answer to this, and it's not necessarily the right one, but it's one that I would like to offer today. I think one of the most important ones, and I've got here the image of an artistic easel with loads of plus signs over it. It's more than the reservation of an artistic subject. Of course, art, painting, poetry, music is creative, but the reason that it's creative is because it's innovative thought. It's creating something new. That doesn't have to be something on an easel or something in a notebook. It can actually be a thought, a different way of doing something. It can be problem solving. So maths, I think, is a highly creative subject. Language, unbelievably creative as a subject as well. That creativity, however, it does require some risk. It takes quite a lot of courage to be creative, because you are, as someone said previously on that Menti, thinking outside the box, thinking differently. And that can be quite a brave and risk-taking thing to do, because it might feel that you might get it wrong. So something that's very important, I think, when we are creative educators is making sure that we cultivate a space of psychological safety, that we cultivate a space where we have a culture of error, and it is okay to be wrong. And in fact, it's welcomed. And we're not saying to deliberately make mistakes, but we're saying that mistakes are part of that learning process, and that it's important for us as educators to model that, to talk about our own experiences, but also to set up scenarios in which every student is going to not be perfect and make errors, and that they can see that happening around them. And I've got some practical suggestions in a moment. That actually creativity is important because we do not see students as objects, but as subjects of people that have their own autonomy, their own sentiency, their own beliefs. This idea that actually they are not people to be molded, but actually there to create their own ideas, their own sense of responsibility, their own values as part of our education system. Creativity is crucially critical thinking. That's what I believe anyway, and that's certainly where my reading and my research has taken me. It's critical thinking. It's not about fitting in to existing societal beliefs or values. It's about not taking the authority of the writer that we are reading or the thing that we are talking about, not accepting authority without first just questioning, just asking, what else does someone else say? Where else can we see this? And I think in an age of fake news, or whatever you want to call it, in an age of all of that misinformation, it is more important than ever to build students who are critical thinkers, who can challenge things that are popping up on their phones, or they're reading in the news, or they're speaking about together, wherever that might be. And that's definitely something that forms part of the master's program, this idea of critical thought, of questioning, of synthesizing with others' ideas, of then drawing your own conclusions. And that is creativity of thought. And I would also say that it is our responsibility as educators to emancipate our students, no matter their subject, no matter their age, no matter their stage in life. Students coming in for some formal education at any stage of their life, it is a privilege that we can work with them. It's a privilege that they can be there a lot of the time as well. So actually giving them the opportunity, the full opportunity of what education can offer, which is freedom, which is giving them the ability to think for themselves and make their own choices. And that is such a huge part of what creativity and creative thought actually is. So how might it look in practice? For me, I think it starts with powerful knowledge, the really useful knowledge that I talked about earlier, this idea of the concepts that underpin the things that we are teaching. Now, as I've said before, I'm not an English language specialist in the sense that you are. So I've given a go at what this might look like for you, but actually I want you to think of some ideas for you. And in a moment, I'm going to give you a moment to think about that. I've given an example in history. So rather than teaching this timeline or this dictator, when were they born, what happened, what's the timeline? Instead, okay, we might explore some of those things, but we might explore them whilst talking about what is the nature of power? What is power? How do people rise to power? What does that say about society that this was able to happen? And how quickly might have that happened? Might be then how they're learning some of those facts that they need for their exam, and all of these things tie in. But actually, it's about that deeper, really useful knowledge underneath it. In English language, I've said, it might be conversations around, why is it structured like this? So my language is structured like this. Why is this structured this way? How is this trying to convey meaning? How is this put together? Who decides what correct English is? I know from my very limited knowledge of teaching language, which is incredibly limited, the idea and the obsession with accuracy, I know can really put students off. It certainly put me off learning languages because you feel like you're just getting it wrong all the time. And instead having a go at this, seeing how much of it you can get through, not worrying too much about the perfect accuracy until we get a bit more used to and a bit more confident with what it is that we're building and what we're utilizing. So how might that look for you? I think creativity in your classroom would look like anything that involves critical thinking and questioning. Anything that involves going beyond the test and goes into the conceptual. And anything, as I said before, that allows people to get comfortable with the idea of risk, making errors, and trying out new ideas. And that is certainly something that I know in English language teaching will be, I'm sure, core to what you are doing, and therefore being creative. This idea of it's actually about creativity of thought. It doesn't necessarily have to be an artistic venture. And then it might be involving new experiences. That doesn't have to be that you're taking someone on a trip somewhere. It could literally be getting a new group of students in to talk to your students to share experience, collaborating on a project, doing something that's slightly different, that uses knowledge in a slightly different way and shakes things up a bit, basically. And then for my most sort of, I suppose, practical slide to come towards the end of this talk on, creativity is anything, as I've said before, that fits some of that criteria, but what might that actually physically look like? Well, it might be around getting students to be really independent. Anything that can involve their student voice in any way, I think is really, really important and is creative. So let's make opportunities for students to be able to express their thoughts in some way, to reflect on their learning. It might be that they choose a project that they're interested in, and that's what they then cultivate their English language around, for example. One of my favourite things to do in any form was to create debates, because I felt that helped to create a culture of error, because quite often I would tell them which side of the debate they had to be on. And that meant that it wasn't about who knew the most about what. It was about who could create the most convincing argument. And it was actually quite tricky for those people that didn't necessarily agree with the thing I was getting them to argue. So it's about creating this space for risk, and that actually that space that might feel slightly anxiety-inducing is actually kind of akin to excitement. It's quite an exciting space to be in once we realize that this culture of error is present and that we are safe to try out new thinking and to try out new ideas. And that can obviously also be based around some boundaried learning with a problem. Let's formulate this as a problem within our English language teaching. It might be that we want a solution to this, that, and the other. How are you going to get there? How are we going to get from this to there? You currently don't know this. How will this happen? Let's problem solve. And it might even involve this exposure to new experiences in collaborating with others, perhaps getting them to teach you the other way around. We've all had these kind of experiences, these pedagogical tools before, but all of that is creative. And I suppose really I'm here as a champion of that and a reminder that those things are really, really important, because they are doing more than just engaging your students. They are building critical thinking, and that is one of the most important things that we can do. And of course, anything that can minimize a kind of teaching to the test culture. Not that those tests and examinations are not important, but that actually by going beyond that, we get more for it. We can do the test and we can do this as well. We can apply this to the real world. We can think about that powerful knowledge that underpins it. So when you're thinking about your curriculum and your planning, I guess my questions for you are thinking around, if I was to not be creative, what would be the impact of that? Because actually it's so scary and it's so profound. What might that creative approach look like? And for something that you've got coming up, how might you be able to potentially embed some creativity or some creative concepts from those discussions that we're having today, although I realise they're not as disgusting as I wanted them to be. I wanted to obviously to go back and forth as much as possible. So I'm going to display the last QR code in a moment. I want to ask you this, but I realise what I'm going to do is I'm going to put those two into one because I'm running out of time. So I will come back to that question. I do want to hear from you. But to kind of, I suppose, sum up from my perspective, is creativity an antidote to constraints we might find ourselves? Is it actually, which is what I'm choosing to believe and learning, actually that it's inseparable from education? No matter how much constraint we might find ourselves under, no matter how restrictive or how prescriptive our curriculum actually is, we are the teachers in those rooms. And a vital part of what education is, no matter the lens, no matter the purpose, is really to get our students to engage, let's face it, with some incredibly difficult concepts and ideas sometimes, to be able to come out the other side as more rounded human beings that can interact with society and be a part of it. And even if our lens was purely economic, that economy is rapidly changing all the time. Society is dynamic. We need to keep up with it. And to do that, why not be creative? Because the actual root of that is innovation, critical thought, is being able to respond in kind of pressurized scenarios because we're not scared of getting things wrong. We're used to that culture of error. It's sort of a win-win, I suppose. So I would say it's our responsibility as an educator, because that critical thought is what leads our students to hopefully their own personal freedoms. And that's what I'd like to end my part of the talk on. But I'm going to now display the last QR code, and I will need to just quickly switch to the next one. I would like us to use this last QR code in the last, I think I've got 7 minutes. I don't want to hold up a coffee break here. I would like you to ask questions, please do. But also this QR code is for comments. It isn't just, if you haven't got a question, but you've got an idea, or you've got a comment, or you've got something you've done in your classroom, I really welcome you using the QR code for that as well, not just for questions. If there are too many questions for me to get through, and I might be able to only answer maybe 2 or 3, then what I've promised to do is respond to them and put them in a Word document, in an email, and send those on, and hopefully they'll be able to reach you, and you'll see all the questions and all my answers to them in time. But I've really, really, really enjoyed being part of this today. I'm genuinely honoured to have been invited to speak, and I'm just going to switch over to this slide now. So hopefully this switches over on your phones and you'll be able to scan what's on the screen, and you'll be able to ask questions or just make those comments. Thank you so much.
I've got the microphone here. If you would
Perfect.
like to ask any question directly to Hannah, you can put up
welcome.
your hand. If you are interested in getting in contact with Hannah, we are going to facilitate all the contact information. Okay. Well, and thank you very much, Hannah, for this thought-provoking presentation that you gave us. It's a real pleasure to have you here in contact, and let's keep on doing things together, because that's the way it works. I would like to give you a big round of applause. Thank you, Hannah, very much.
Thank you so much. That's great. I can't see at the moment if there are any questions. I'm hoping... Oh, there are a couple. Sorry. There's one here, so I'd like to respond if I've got a moment. Have I got a minute to respond?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So someone here has asked, have you done this on your courses? Could you please share any first-hand experiences? So yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think I was trying to give some examples as I went through, and perhaps I didn't give as many as I intended to. But on the leadership and education course, for example, I think prior to me joining, there was quite a lot of sort of lecture-based content. You know, it's quite a heavy subject. There is quite a lot of knowledge and things that actually need to think about the things that underpin it. So actually, one of the ways I tried to be creative was actually changing our assessment. Our assessment went from being a kind of literature review and going through lots of concepts and lots of ideas to actually being a more authentic assessment, which is asking them to utilize the knowledge that they may have gained through their own research and formulate it in a in a report, in a proposal, and deliver a presentation as though they were the leader in their educational institution, where they narrowed down a particular issue that they wanted to focus on. They talked through some of the concepts and they applied their knowledge and said, this is how it works, this is the impacts I think this change might have. And it was anything that was kind of future thinking. So going from this kind of idea of, you know, we've got all this knowledge of leadership concepts, change theory, all that sort of stuff that can be very dry, and actually just in applying it, really quite straightforward in just applying it, I think had a big change. But a second thing, if you aren't able to change, you know, big things like the assessment framework, for example, one of the first sessions that I lead, when I open the session by asking them what they think leadership means and what they think the purpose of leadership is. And we have an extended debate around the notion of leadership, and even questioning how far leadership is even a topic within itself. Is it really a construct? Is it something that we can really study, or is it something that's dynamic? And I think it's about continuing to question the statement in front of us, to question the question, and to encourage students to do that. And what I see over time is, you know, at the start of all of my sessions, I will say, we're thinking critically with everything. I want you to challenge me. I always want you to challenge me. And I want you to be questioning the kind of the truth behind anything that, you know, not taking anything for granted, not reading something I give you and thinking this must be the answer. So with every reading that I give, with every question that I ask, I always ask that question of, if we were to play devil's advocate, if we were to argue against this, what might we say? What might be the counter to this? Do we have any readers out there or researchers out there that would disagree with this? And I am being that redirector. I'm being the one that's pointing and going, okay, I can see now that you think there's so much, you know, you've been really blown away by this reading that we've done, and now they were just starting to use it as though it was truth. And then that's my responsibility as an educator to say, whoa, hold up. This might have seemed really convincing, but you only read this today and you've only read one piece. Do you think there could be other alternatives? And some of that creativity is genuinely about questioning, is about the nature of how we question our students and making sure that they continue to question the things around them. And over time, you will notice that they start to do it more naturally. That, you know, my learners in the room, many of whom are head teachers, are now coming in and going, but you said that, but actually, what about this? And it does take a while for that confidence to build up, because particularly if certain students have studied in certain cultures where they weren't allowed to question a teacher, which many of my students were in those kinds of environments, it does take a little while for those practices to embed. But we stick at it. We keep asking the questions. We keep challenging. We keep saying, what can we disagree with? And it really can start as simply as that.
When I read one of your slides saying that creativity is really essential in education, and why don't we teach it? So that's the challenge, how we can teach creativity, incorporated in our classroom. Well, thank you very much, Hannah. And it's a real pleasure to count on you and the University of East London. And we would really like to keep on working together. And I will give some break time to the audience.
Yes, I don't want to hold up the coffee.
Another big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Hannah.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you so much.
See you soon.
Goodbye. Bye.
Bye-bye. See you soon.